The webinar will be held under the theme Social Relief and Health and Safety Interventions to Mitigate the Effects of COVID-19. For more on this, let's take you there live.
This virus at work, they needed to be compensated. So the Commissioner Vuyo Mafata will talk to that. On the income support to workers, we were supposed to have the acting commissioner, Ms. Marsha Bronkhorst. Unfortunately, she contracted the virus and she's not feeling well. We have a replacement by the name of Ms. Judith Kumbi. She's the Chief Operations Officer of the Compensation Fund. She will be talking to us on the contribution by the Unemployment Insurance Fund in terms of social security. And then thereafter, we'll have the question and answers, and then we will close. The Deputy Minister will give us a closing remarks. So that's the program. Without wasting any time, I'm going to ask the Honorable Minister, Minister Ngesi, who's the Minister of Employment and Labour, to give us an opening address. Over to you, Minister. Minister, you seem to be muted.
Do you hear me now?
We can hear you, Minister. We can hear you, Minister. Thank you.
Thank you, DG, as the program director and moderator of this webinar, and to the Deputy Minister, Mr. Martin Kingston, the Vice President of BUSA, Mr. Begin Chalinchali, the General Secretary of COSATU and the Labour Convener of NETLEC, and Mr. Duma Kubule, the Independent Economist. And if it was government, there was going to be a complaint that it's a list of all men except the Deputy Minister. The representatives of the social partners, labor, business, and the community, the Commissioner of the Compensation Fund, the UIF Commissioner, and all senior management of the department and its entities, the members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. 57,000 fellow South Africans have succumbed. They've succumbed to the COVID-19. Thankfully, the overwhelming majority of those infected recovered. The pandemic and the lockdowns resulted in massive disruptions to economic activity and livelihoods. 2020 experienced a 7% drop in the GDP, resulting in 1 million jobs lost. The first quarter unemployment rate for 2021 rose by 0.1% to 32.6%, though less than 33.4% predicted by economists. The figures are stabilizing but remain unacceptably high. As government, working together with the social partners, we were able to mitigate some of the effects of the pandemic and the lockdowns, leveraging our security institutions or social security institutions, particularly the Unemployment Insurance Fund, working with business and labor to create the COVID-19 tax benefits and to build a mass network to distribute the new benefits on an unpredictable scale, or unprecedented rather scale. At the same time, we used our health and safety inspectors both to support the social partners in NETLEC in drafting or in the drafting of the COVID-19 health and safety directions, as well as to inspect and enforce the new regulations alongside health and safety regulations. This we achieved with the reduced budgets as the pandemic and economic trends adversely impacted government revenues. On health and safety, to enforce compliance, and despite the COVID-19 conditions, over 31,000 health and safety inspections were conducted for the period 1st April 2020 to 31st March 2021. The department appointed an additional 500 OHS inspectors, a welcome addition in the battle against COVID-19, making possible a fourfold increase in the number of the inspections planned, which are planned for 2021-22 financial year. The target is to conduct over 96,000 OHS inspections this year. On social security, the COVID-19 TERS benefits started paying out from April 2020. As at the 31st March 2021, payments were made to 267,000 employers and to 5.4 million individual employees at the cost of 58 billion, providing support to laid-off workers, their families and communities across the country. The pandemic also exposed the inadequate capacity of the state on many fronts. Payment of COVID-19 TERS benefits by the UIF quickly became the target of fraud and corruption. We're therefore grateful to the Office of the Auditor General for their assistance in analyzing systemic weaknesses requiring strengthened controls, and to the SIU for the investigating the possible fraud and corruption. We were also protected against the fraud and corruption by the UIF's Follow the Money strategy to audit all employers that received the COVID-19 TERS funding. The auditors verified payments of 16 billion and traced 228 million that was fraudulently claimed by employers. And I must indicate that they are not yet done. We are maybe still discover more. Of the 121 employers that have already been handed over to the Hawks via the Presidential Fusion Center, 16 have appeared in court. Shortcomings which we have identified. The pandemic also exposed the shortcomings of the UIF and our social security safety net, particularly with regard to the informal sector, the atypical employees, and the gig economy. A process will be taking with the network social partners of the policy and legislation review. As we roll out the vaccine program, I would flag the recent agreement in network to utilize the workplaces as the vaccination points. Also, we recognize the role of the compensation fund and the licensed mutual assurance companies, which have paid for medical treatment and the replacement of the lost income for 12,500 claims over the last 12 months. These bodies have also set aside 1.3 billion in terms of the COVID Act to fund the vaccines for some 3 million uninsured workers and COVID pensioners. But I must raise a red flag here. We have to be extra careful. We have to ensure that our systems are in place. We don't open ourselves to another fraud in this big amount which we're talking about. So we must be extra careful. On social dialogue, the pandemic has also taught us the value of social dialogue, a core value upon which South Africa's democracy was founded. The NETLEC, the National Economic Development and Labour Council, played a critical role in uniting the social partners in a common response to the pandemic, shaping the income relief responses and the health and safety directions for workplaces. The Council's role in promoting social solidarity at this time cannot be overemphasized. NETLEC also continues to facilitate social dialogue around issues of growth and jobs, monitoring implementation of the Presidential Job Summit commitments and blocking key structural reforms now which have been taken over by Operation Vulindlela, led by the National Treasury and Presidents. NEDLEC also facilitated input by the social partners into government's economic reconstruction and recovery plan, which we call it the ERRP, which was announced by President in October 2020. So the plan is there to lift us out of the economic doldrums. The focus now but must be on the implementation. This is another area where we have to warn all the social partners, warn ourselves. It's very quick to come up with a lot of decisions, of policies and everything. But when it comes to implementation, we are very weak. How do we fast track the implementation of this particular plan is very key. On the joined-up government, during the 2021-22, the Department's Public Employment Services will continue working with the Presidency to coordinate the Pathway Network Management Program, which brings together nationally work, learning, and job opportunities for the youth made easily accessible or accessible on a digital platform. This requires the kind of the joined-up the President refers to. Relevant departments and agencies have already signed up to the Memorandum of Understanding. Some 436,000 youth not in employment, education, or in training, whom we call them the NEETs, have already supported or have been supported with the 17 or 170,000 placed into various work opportunities through the wider pathway management network. On decent work, I believe it's critical during these trying times to reaffirm the mandate of the department to protect workers and promote decent work. The labor inspectors do this through enforcing compliance with the labor market policies and laws. The CCMA works closely with the department in this respect. 297 compliance inspections will be conducted during the 2021 with a continued commitment to prosecute non-compliant employers in relation to the Basic Conditions of Employment Act and the National Minimum Wage. To report on the current policy initiative, we have introduced the COIDA Amendment Bill, which brings major improvements in the benefits paid, as well as including domestic workers in the category of the employees entitled to occupational injury benefits, and the new provisions for the rehabilitation of the injured workers with the aim of assisting their return to the labor market. Also before Parliament is the Employment Equity Act Amendment Bill, as well as the ILO Convention 190 on the eradication of violence and harassment in the workplace for the ratification. And my department has also developed a draft code of good practice, which has been published for public comment. This supports government's priority to combat gender-based violence. Finally, I must thank the NEDLEC and the social partners for their work and commitment to promoting a united response to the pandemic and the lockdown, and supporting the societal solidarity through social dialogue during these difficult times. We will continue to strengthen our policies and labor laws, which create an enabling and a harmonious environment in the world of work. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you very much. May I make this appeal to the media? Would you please add your names on the chat box when you commenting or asking a question? Thank you. The Minister has highlighted quite a number of points, and key amongst those are the policy fault lines and the social protection policies that we have and implemented during the during this period of COVID-19. Also, the important role played by NEDLAC and the importance of social dialogue. Just before COVID, Mr. Chali, you will remember that there were calls that were made, and some of those calls were questioning the role of NEDLAC and the impact of the work that NEDLAC is doing. So COVID forced us to come together and come up with the social contract. I know that you've been asked to prepare a contribution by the Labour constituency to the pandemic and in partnership with the department. May I also ask you to reflect on the issues that the minister has raised with regards to the role of NEDLAC, its importance, and maybe as a way of responding to the calls that were saying there's no need for NEDLAC to exist, and that was before we were hit by COVID, and also how organized labor will be dealing with the policy fault lines that the minister has spoken about. May I ask Mr. Begin Chalinchali to address us? Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Chalinchali.
Thank you, Comrade. Thank you, Program Director DG Lamati. And good morning to all, the Minister of Labour and the team, fellow panelists, and those who might have connected through the link to participate to this webinar. Firstly, let me just tender my apology that I indicated to the organizers that I would have to leave at 11 o'clock because of a commitment that I cannot shift, but I have also to join the workers group in the LO as I'm a member of the governing body representing workers, which is the duty that I need to fulfill. Minister, when you shows your surprise that almost all the panelists are men, except the Deputy Minister, you make me surprised because the people who invited men is your department. But thank you for the invitation to participate in the webinar. It was not made clear to me on the invitation because the invitation, it says, is addressed to COSATU via NEDLAC, whether one was invited as the overall convener or as the General Secretary of COSATU. But nonetheless, I hope the intention is to hear and critique the work that the department carried over the period that you are mentioning, the last 12 months since the attack by COVID-19. We'll raise our voice in the areas that we have talked about, to raise it through what we think are the positive, what are the negatives, and what are the challenges, and what, in our view, should be the issues that need to be considered. We had hoped that Minister will narrow the issues of the COVID only to the areas that are covered by the ministry in the employment and labor, but not to talk broadly about what government contribution could have been in the other areas, the role of Treasury and others, the question of the economic recovery plan due to time. And we hope if the department is interested to host a webinar to speak on those issues, we'll welcome to do so. So our observation will be in relation to the relief, to the institutional arrangement, to the governance, and the compliance in terms of the inspectorate and the enforcement. As you are correctly saying, both DG and Minister, that the attack by COVID-19 unexpected, it was not planned. But the lockdown make it even worse in terms of how we try to respond. We're all caught off guard. But what became quite clearer was that workers were not going to receive an income because South Africa has no universal social protection coverage. We got the different ones all over the show, but we don't have the one that covers everybody. But it also became quite clearer to us that Treasury was not interested or has no capacity or no political will to intervene and use government money to protect its citizens here in the form of those that were going to lose income. So government was not coming on board. The first issue that we want to recognize in this engagement was the quick thinking by the leadership in the Department of Labor and Employment. And I remember Comrade Tulas us meeting on a Sunday under difficult times because we're not even allowed to travel. We have no permit to travel, but we take that risk and we met. And that's when the idea of using the UIF as the only option available to sustain the worker income. So it was not an easy decision to be explored in the first place, because the question rose as to, yes, what will happen if the fund is depleted and when the economy becoming worse and people have to be retrenched and to apply for their benefit. It was a risk, but I think we all agree it was a risk worth taken because there were reserves and there were some kind of surplus. What is not said is that this intervention was a workers' money, not government money. It was a workers' money contributed by the employer and the workers themselves. So we think we need to understand the question of TERS and the UIF, that it was not government money. It's less said in the media. It was the workers' money contributed by the employer and the workers themselves. But then it raised some challenges. The first challenges was the institutional arrangement, that the UIF infrastructure was never designed to anticipate the high volumes of application. So the infrastructure and the personnel that were employed in this branch, I'm not sure that it's right to use it as a branch of the DLA, never anticipated the millions and millions of applications that flooded the office. The second challenge was that because of the lockdown, there was a restriction of movement. Trade union officials could not move around, assist workers to do their application. So what was left in the main was the online application. And as we know, the majority of the workers lack access to the ITs. The fourth one, in our view, was the communication challenges. At different times, the branch, the UIF, was communicating confusing and contradictory messages. The calculation of the benefit was the big challenges, and at some stage, it led to workers striking because they felt that the money they received was not accurate from the information that they had either received from from the UIF communication. The fifth one, of course, was that these challenges in the UIF attracted some attack, mainly based on ideology of some sort, that government is incapable or no capacity to manage its affairs in terms of this application. That there were voices who were saying, no, only the private sector is capable of managing and administering this application, which I think we all fought together that the state has the capacity, like any other institution, if it's provided correctly and sourced accordingly. The sixth challenge was the unilateral decision by the ministry, sometimes whether to continue with the payment or should stop it, despite the statement that was made, which we understood by the president, that as long as the disaster management or the disaster continue, there's a commitment to assist workers. The question of the cut-off of the application and etc. The seventh challenges, of course, was the non-contribution by some employers who had made deductions from the workers' pay but never handed over the money to the UI, but also the question of not declaring all workers in the workplace, but as well as the fear that when they do the application, they will be exposed that they have higher workforce than the one that they have declared. But of course, there were other employers who were hiring undocumented workers and have failed to register to it. But despite all these issues, I think they were positive. The first one, in our view, was the question of the leadership, as I've indicated, by the ministry. But secondly, when challenges was experienced, almost in the first week of these applications, was the availability of the minister 2 times a day, in this case, met with the General Secretary of the affiliate of COSATU, who says, we got some challenges here. Are you prepared as a minister to clarify us on some of the issues? And the minister says, I'm prepared to avail myself and my team 2 times a day, every day, Monday to Sunday. That was the initial response by the minister. And we want, in this respect, to just appreciate the persons that the department make a focal point in this, Utsiamo and Comrade Andre Krill from the unions that were doing the management of this thing. But the second issue, which was positive, was the department indicating the shortfalls within that branch. It was frank, prepared to acknowledge the shortfall. Of course, at some times, Minister, you were angry when we criticized you through the media as to say what is the shortfall. But you accepted that the best way of addressing some challenges is to address where there are shortcomings. The third one was the common strategy coming together, workers and government, and to say what needed to be done in order to communicate a correct and the right messages and developing a strategy. The fourth one, which was also positive in the response, the fifth one, was the exposure of corruption. In the main, it was workers who were saying, we have seen our employer applying for tests when in fact we are working and we don't understand. Can you explain this? Because there were some employers who wanted to have a double dip or dipping in terms of getting money from the UIF, but also the production was continuous. But also the workers who were saying, my employer is not applying when I'm checking through the system. and which then exposed that the employers were deducting and not handing it over, which we regarded to be the positive. But also, there was an exposure which later was addressed, the coordination, which we call it the seamless coordination now, between the UIF, the SARS, the banks, and the Home Affairs. And when we're dealing either with foreign nationals, or people whose IDs and all the sorts that were problematic for workers to be receiving their monies in dealing with those issues. Now, we thought that we did what was supposed to be done, that the experiences have indicated that we enter into a particular phase and eventually we're managing those particular challenges. So they were positive, and I think there are lessons that the department will carry forward and are going to come to them quickly. Then the second issue was the issues of the governance, the question of the Disaster Management Act and the directions that were being applied. Firstly, was that when there was a lockdown, the first challenges with the disaster managed directions was that it did not allow trade unionists to be the right of movement and to be able to operate and assist workers, both in terms of the health and safety in the workplace. The second issue on that one was the question of the health and safety in the workplace in itself, to the extent that many employers were not complying, but the department did not and still do not have a sufficient inspectors. So the lack of inspectorate and enforcement and the report that department was giving at that time, that there was a very huge non-compliance. Our concern was that there were not deterrent action that was taken to deal with. Of course, we appreciated, Minister, the additional 500 inspectors. But as we said then, that still is not enough. There was a problem in the definition of essential services, which I think we later worked it on to say the intention, as we understand it, of the Disaster Management Act or in the regulation, you were referring to the critical services like food delivery or food production, petrol, and etc. So as I'm closing, Comrade Director, is that we appreciate the role played by compensation fund in terms of extending its scope and to regard those who are 60 or over, those who are unable to attend, that they can still be assisted. Those that they've exhausted any sick leave, because also the definition of being just isolated was not fitting very well with the definition of sick leave. There is another role that came out that catch our eye, was the role played by bargaining council where they existed in helping in terms of application, but also in rallying the employers to be acting in a uniform way to ensure that workers are protected. So we need also now, as we have learned it, to speed up the negotiation on the universal social protection so that everyone is covered, including those in an informal sector or those who are vulnerable workers, those who are not specified in terms of their contract employment. The contribution by the public services, long ago a decision was taken that they need to make a contribution. It was never implemented. We needed to look at it. The strengthening of the inspectorate and enforcement, the question of I think we need to learn to stop unilateralism and also promote the social dialogue in dealing with those issues. But more so, the question of that UIF monies and the monies that are being contributed here are workers, and we should not use unilateralism in deciding those. And therefore, the employer and the workers must have more say, even in those advisory bodies like your UIF. I will not answer the question of the role of NETLAC and whether NETLAC is still relevant. Safe to say, if there was no NETLAC, all the experiences and the effort that has and ensure that almost 60 billion rand were planted back to the economy will not have happened. So people will have to judge themselves, and I think Martin may have more say on these things as he was engaged. And NETLAC was meeting, comrade, almost every day, almost twice a day to address these issues. Just think for a moment, if there was no NETLAC, there will be no direction, there will be no leadership in the whole country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Beki and Charlie, for that insightful contribution. I think you were reminding us of where we come from, the pitfalls that we had to jump over, so that we're able today to say we've paid just close to 60 billion to the workers. It was not a plain sailing exercise. We had to fight amongst ourselves, but it was in good spirit. It was for the benefit of the country. And again, thanks for raising a number of issues that we still need to tackle. The lack of universal coverage. I think the minister spoke to this when he referred to policy fault lines, and also the fact that we still have to finalize the issue of the contribution of public servants to the unemployment insurance fund. We are seized with that task, and we committed to making sure that we finalize it. And again, I think what you presented was a balanced assessment of the work that was done. You gave us 7 challenges, and you were just short of one to make it 6, to make it 7. So there are 6 positives and 7 challenges. We'll work on that so that we have a much more balanced. You give us a much more balanced assessment next time, and thank you very much for that. Now, business also played a very important role during the discussions that took place at NETLAC, as we have heard from the General Secretary of COSATU. Mr. Kingston, I would like you to just reflect on the question that I raised to Mr. Charlie with regards to the work that was done by NETLAC and the contribution of business, and the calls that were made by from some quarters that were coming from some quarters that NETLAC has passed its sell-by date and therefore should not exist as an institution, or its role wasn't contributing anything to discussions around economic growth and the challenges that we're experiencing in the labor market. Over to you, Mr. Kingston.
Thank you very much, DG, and good morning to you, to the Minister, Deputy Minister, all of the other panelists, specifically and particularly for Comrade Beki, and to all of those who are participating in this webinar today. On behalf of Organised Business, I very much appreciate the opportunity to discuss how we've worked together, what the challenges have been, but how, in many respects, the pandemic has created an opportunity for some level of social solidarity that we have not experienced previously in South Africa, and which I believe we have both put to good effect and need to going forwards. I'd like to talk a little bit, if I may, about the commencement of the pandemic, the formation of Business for South Africa, of the formation of the Solidarity Fund, what happened last year, in particular, the work on TERS, what is happening this year in the context of the vaccination rollout and lessons that have been learned. And I'm going to try and cover ground that is complementary to the input that has already been given by the Minister, as well as by the GS. You know, it seems a long time ago, I have to say, DG, but the Busa Board meeting on the 11th of March of 2020 anticipated that there was going to be a meeting convened at NEDLAC to discuss the imminent advent, I have to say, of the pandemic. And that took place on the 16th of March at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, NEDLAC Special Exco. It was held at the IDC. We knew little about social distancing or mask wearing, but even then I remember, I'm sure that both Becky and the Minister will also remember, there were a limited number of seats all sat spatially appropriately apart in a way that we wouldn't see, I have to say, sadly, today. And that was really the beginning of, as the GS has said, almost 24/7 activity at NEDLAC, and both bilaterally and multilaterally between the social partners to tackle the pandemic. A pandemic which, of course, has brought into very stark relief all of the challenges within the country, not just of unemployment, inequality, and poverty, but many of the other structural issues that we had failed to deal with as a country over the past 25 years, and where we have no choice now but to grasp the nettle. And I'd like to feel that the partnerships that have been established over the past 15 months equip us so to do. One of the first things that we, of course, did as partners was to establish the Solidarity Fund, an organization that is independent. It's not accountable to any of the social partners, but to the country at large. And literally within 2 weeks of that seed having been sown, and the seed was indeed sown on the 16th of March, it had been established with an independent board. It was a month later able to claim that it had raised over 3 billion rand from a vast variety of sources, both donors onshore and offshore, large and small, individual and institutional. It has established 3 platforms: a humanitarian platform focusing on the likes of food relief, gender-based violence, all of which had become exacerbated by the pandemic; on healthcare, bringing PPE into the country. Many of us will remember there was no PPE that we had in the country at that stage in March 2020. And on communication and advocacy, particularly with regard to behavior change. And the Solidarity Fund is now raising another tranche of funding to focus on the vaccine rollout, again, particularly with an emphasis on registration and ameliorating some of the major problems that we found. Problems including the slow pace of decision-making and implementation within the state, the very capacity constraints that the Minister has referred to, where its agility was able to come to the fore. The second matter that I wanted to talk about was the creation of Business for South Africa. It was sponsored by Business Unity South Africa and the Black Business Council. It was, in fact, conceived of on the same week, the week of the 9th and 10th of March last year, as a virtual platform. No membership of any particular organized business, just the ability to bring skills and expertise on a pro bono basis as experts in a particular discipline to the table at a time when we were all in lockdown. At our peak, I think we had 450 people working on the platform, working 24/7, I would have to say. And again, focusing on 3 areas, all of which are pertinent to today's discussion. The first being healthcare, working with the National Department of Health, primarily on the procurement of PPE, but also the establishment of a local manufacturing partnership for those goods that could indeed be manufactured in South Africa as PPE, working there in close conjunction with organized labor and indeed with government. The labor market platform, and I'll talk about that in a second because its primary focus, of course, was the work on UIF, and an economic intervention platform, which I'll talk about thereafter, which resulted in part in input into the reconstruction and recovery strategy. On the labor market work and the work on UIF, we worked hand in glove with organized labor and indeed with the Department of Employment and Labor in the UI subcommittee and the mandated UIF operational task team. And I think that in that context, we need to recognize that we enabled many thousands of businesses, particularly the smallest, including informal businesses, to be assisted with TERS-related challenges. And despite the fact that the TERS process has been fraught with complications and complexities, and I think we all understand and appreciate that, caused by changing directives, systems issues, and capacity challenges from its inception, the reality was that there were very significant breakthroughs and indeed, as we know, some 60 billion rand of funding made available to some 16 million beneficiaries who were undoubtedly disadvantaged and hugely so, not only by the pandemic, but by the circumstances that had preceded the pandemic. And the work that we did in that context, as I said, in partnership with, not alongside, in partnership with organized labor, government, and indeed civil society, was in the form of identification of common challenges and blockages, determining what the root causes were and analyzing them appropriately, collaboratively seeking workable solutions with the UIF and other social partners. And I think that we need to call out some of the successes, the updates to the TERS portal functionality to enable clearer status updates to employers and employees alike, detailed, frequently asked questions and documentation underpinning that, which were regularly updated, clear and consistent communication to employers from the UIF on changes to TERS, hosting regular webinars to educate employers and create conduits for questions and answers, implementing formal dispute processes, and a policy clarity document to guide auditors, the release of which is imminent. At the outset, we were having daily meetings, sometimes multiple times a day, between social partners and the UIF to handle the myriad of queries and challenges that were then arising. And those meetings have now decelerated, understandably, but I would like to believe that good relationships exist, enabling individual cases to be escalated via officials wherever necessary. So I think that although there were many challenges that had to be dealt with in the early days, the tenacity, I would have to say, particularly of labor and business, alongside government and the UIF, is to be applauded for having achieved the relief that we were able to provide in the context of extremely difficult circumstances. Of course, other forms of relief, and I think that the GS has also alluded to this, have not been seen to be as successful. And we need to recognize that we're not through the woods yet. In fact, we're far from being through the woods when we have a third wave upon us, winter approaching, and an entire vaccination program to get through. We've only just commenced phase 2. I'll talk about that in a moment. But the reality is that we learned the hard lessons of cooperation and collaboration in the most difficult of circumstances. I wanted to talk about the third area of activity, again, in collaboration with our social partners, and indeed, particularly with the department, and in many of these cases, with the minister playing a facilitative or a chairing role, being in the work that we did on the economic recovery strategy, which had to be focused on sustainable job creation and inclusive growth, but had to recognize many of the structural constraints. This was, as far as we were concerned, a silver lining in an otherwise very dark cloud, where we could reset the economic trajectory on a sustainable growth path, inclusive every step of the way, as a consequence of the pandemic. We, as business, authored an economic recovery strategy, which we tabled to government and to our social partners in July of last year. It set out our recommendations and proposals as to how we might be able to reset South Africa's social development path. And we were mindful of the need to limit the focus to a number of key projects, some 12, some policy focus areas, and immediate actions that could improve consumer and business confidence. We moved into a consultation process at NEDLAC in the context of the NEDLAC Economic Recovery Action Plan, facilitated and overseen by NEDLAC. I need to mention in that context the outstanding work, I think, that has been done by NEDLAC and by its executive director, Lisa Seftel, in trying to integrate the views of all the parties and focusing in particular on immediate or short-term measures, as well as longer-term structural reforms and other programs that needed to be put in place, which was finalized in September of last year. And then, of course, the government's economic reconstruction and recovery plan, in significant part, I would have to say, drawn from the work that had been done in NEDLAC and certainly aligned with it, with some updates, which was announced in October 2020. We needed, all of us, to recognize the requirement to build a bridge to recovery beyond COVID-19. Let us not forget that before the pandemic, we were already in a recession. We were about to be downgraded to sub-investment ratings. And we needed, and I think we still need, but we're making progress, an unambiguous and compelling new narrative focused on inclusive economic growth and investments to persuade capital providers, both domestically and internationally, to invest in South Africa and to work together to build the economy and tackle poverty, inequality, and unemployment. And in that context, we needed to address constraints and challenges which have persisted, I would have to argue, since 1994. We needed to deal with constraints that were persisting, whether it be the capacity of the state, whether it be the issues of corruption and crime, inequality, and the need for sustainable transformation, and to identify what was required to drive fundamental change, specifically and particularly in the context of our competitiveness, of unlocking the potential of SMMEs, of accelerating economic transformation, of attracting and mobilizing capital domestically and internationally, underpinned by greater policy certainty and with an agreement on key national projects and policy interventions, and perhaps most importantly, with effective and timely implementation. And acknowledging all the time that we have to compete in these circumstances, in particular for capital and for resources and attention with other markets, not just emerging markets, but on a global basis, that we needed to demonstrate fiscal discipline to reduce the cost of capital, and that we needed at all times to be consistent in our messaging. And that the only way, DG, that we could do this was by ensuring that all stakeholders partner across key areas and focus on ensuring delivery and accountability, that we should acknowledge the limits on the state and SOE capacity and funding, and that the only way we could do that was through a social and economic compact involving social partners, government, labor, civil society, and business, if we were to succeed. And in that context, delineating the responsibility of each of those partners clearly and with appropriate accountability. We assembled as Business for South Africa a team of industry experts which analyze sectors and projects with a particular focus, as I say, on sustainable jobs and GDP growth. We identified key challenges, regulatory obstacles and policy interventions, and the need to be able to fund projects that were viable and sustainable. And we considered every industry sector across both urban and rural and peri-urban. We looked at those that supported small and medium-sized businesses as well as micro enterprises.
Martin Kingston there is representing organized business in that one-day conversation by the Department of Employment and Labour that was preceded by the Minister, Thulas Nxesi. Right, let's take it to the top of the hour now.